Hi, everybody. My name is Don Lee, and welcome to the last session in this series from the JSS, that's the Japan Sake and Shochu Makers Association, where we're featuring another 4 amazing bartenders making cocktails and having a discussion. Today's topic will be talking about appropriation and appreciation and what that means in terms of Asian cocktails. So those of you that are joining us today watching, if you have any questions, comments, please put them in the chat. I'll keep an eye on that, and we will ask people as it's happening, or we'll follow up towards the end after people have demonstrated their cocktail and we have our discussion. So I'm just going to ask everyone to introduce themselves before we begin. I'll start myself. I'm Don Lee. I am Korean American, born in Los Angeles. I've been living in New York for about 20 years now, and most recently was running a bar called Existing Conditions. And I am going to be your moderator today. So first up, Haru, can you introduce yourself?
Yes, welcome. I'm Haru Zenda. I am Japanese Romanian, born in New York City. I currently work at Masa as the head bartender, as well as sake sommelier there. Pleasure to meet you.
Great. And next we have Caer.
Hi everyone, my name is Maiko Ferguson. I'm based in Austin, Texas. I'm currently the bar manager of Drinkwell, but I am most well known probably for my work with Daijoubu Pop-Up, where we make super Asian cocktails. I was born in Los Angeles, and I am first generation Japanese on my mother's side.
Next up, we have joining us as well, Masa. This is the bartender, not the restaurant Masa.
Hi Don, hi everyone. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Masahiro Urushido. I work at the bar called Katana, Kitten in New York City. Originally from Japan, moved to New York City 12 years ago, and I live in Brooklyn with my family now, and great to be here.
And finally, joining us from Chicago, we have Julia.
Hello, thank you so much for having me. My name is Julia Momose. I'm a bar owner in Chicago, a little bar called Kumiko, and I was born and raised in Japan.
Great. So first, we're going to have everyone make a drink showcasing a shochu cocktail that they made specifically for this occasion, and then we'll have our discussion following that. So first up, Haru, what cocktail do you have for us?
So I actually have 2 cocktails. I actually have the Ryukyu, which is an Aomori based cocktail, as well as a Kinkira, which is a imo shochu based cocktail. So I'm actually going to use a Koshu Aomori. So it's actually an aged Aomori. Aomori tends to be very much richer in flavor because they use black koji. So it has this nice bit of acidity to it. And we're going to use that as the base. And then to complement that, I actually like to use this Sudachi-chu. So it's a shochu-based liqueur that uses sudachi, which is essentially a more southern style key lime, Japanese key lime, if you will. And then just as a little bit of balancing, I'm actually using a little bit of triple sec just to balance out that citrus quality to it, as the sudachis tends to be a little sharp. And then finally, kind of as a little X factor, I'm using a Goya syrup, which is a Asian bitter melon. It's actually very common in Okinawa, as well as lots of parts of Southern Asia. Has this lovely bitter green quality to it that made me find the compliment. You know, as they say, what grows together goes together. And we're actually kind of making this like a tiki cocktail. So we actually don't really need to shake it, as we're actually going to build it on some crushed ice. And then finally, just to garnish it, we have a lovely straw, and actually made some Goya chips. Essentially, Goya tends to be very bitter when it's on its own, but if you add a little bit of fat and salt, it actually turns very nice. And then just to add a little bit of color, but also aromatics of that lovely bitterness, I'm actually using a Kyoto matcha powder, just to add a little bit of color to it. and that is the Ryukyu, which is named after the archipelago that the Okinawa island is part of. Now, the second cocktail I have is kind of a bit more on the fall side. So it's using the Imo Shochu. Oddly enough, this is the Kuro Kirishima, which is an Imo Shochu that actually also uses black koji. So very full body. The Kinpira kind of came out of a classical Japanese dish that I had in mind, where you essentially stir fry lots of root vegetables together in this sweet soy flavor. I'm going to add just 4 drops of a gobo tincture. This is actually a burdock root. Burdock is what I consider almost like a musky mountain carrot. So has this very rich aromatic to it. And then we're going to add a little bit of lemon juice to it as well, just to give it a little bit of citrus. And then I'm actually going to make it an egg white cocktail. So we're going to give it a nice dry shake first. And then afterwards, we're going to wet shake it just to chill it down. Okay. Now for this one, I actually want to kind of play off of that classic root vegetable flavors, and actually have a dehydrated carrot powder. So we're going to actually garnish that right on the foam. And then another classic flavor to go along with it is actually some toasted sesame seeds, just to enhance that umami flavor that you're going to get from the Imo Shochu as well as the egg white. And that will be the Kinpira. So 2 different styles of Shochu cocktails. Thank you.
Great. It's always funny to me doing these Zoom sessions that Zoom thinks that when the sound of shaking is background noise that needs to be filtered out. So it always stops whenever someone's shaking a drink. A few questions about your ingredients. So
Sure.
Sudachi, fairly difficult to get. Where do you order your Sudachi from?
Well, so this is actually a Sudachi-based liqueur. So if you can actually just get it in the bottle. So it's actually readily available in a lot of places that actually do carry shochu. I found this, I believe, in at least 3 different stores in Manhattan. So it was quite available. And basically, if you can find these 2, they're usually together. Honestly, shochus and this Sudachi chu.
For people who've never had that Sudachi, either as a fruit or the liqueur, how does it compare? Is it comparable to other, fruits, in versus fresh versus liqueur people have had, or you find it different working with it?
So I guess if you were looking for sort of a substitute, you could try key limes, as it's much sharper than a regular lime, if you will, like a key lime would be, but it has this very fragrant quality to it that's a little bit more robust than a key lime.
Got it. And then can you walk us through how you make the bitter melon syrup?
Certainly. So I essentially made it like a Oreo salcum, where I put the slices of the bitter melon together with Japanese organic sugar. And then I essentially let the juices from the bitter melon seep out into the sugar itself. So I didn't actually add any additional water to it per se. Got it.
And then you just filter that off, and then does it come out to be about the same strength as like a 1-to-1 simple? Is it sweeter?
I would say it is on the sweeter side, but the raw bitterness of what the bitter melon is actually helps to balance out the overall sweetness that the syrup is.
Very cool. And then finally, the gobo tincture. I'm assuming you're also making that yourself. Are you using fresh gobo, using dried gobo?
So I'm actually using fresh gobo. It's really available in a lot of Japanese specialty stores, especially in New York. I wouldn't know if there is quite a substitute to it, perhaps the dried version, but I found that the oils and the flavors are much more fresh in fresh burdock.
And for people who want to try playing with that, do you find that besides the flavor aspect of it, tasting like the burdock root, does it do the same? Does it have the same function as, say, adding bitters, where you're adding structure to a drink?
I would say so. Yes. So when cooking with gobo, you actually have to let it sit in water to kind of release this musky flavor to it. But I kind of enjoy that rich, earthy flavor that the burdock has, and kind of like imparting it onto the cocktail. So it does work well as a bitter on its own.
Amazing. Thank you for those cocktails.
Thank you.
Next up, we have Caer making us a cocktail as well.
I, like Haru, have 2 cocktails prepared, but if for some reason we are running short of time, I'm happy just to do one. The first one is a cocktail that we did at one of my pop-ups that originally was a Korean-inspired cocktail, but I adapted it so it would be more Japanese-inspired. We call it originally a banchan martini after the Korean pickles that usually come along with Korean barbecue, but I'm making today a tsunemono martini, which is based off the pickled cucumbers that you often find. It's a very traditional cucumber salad. So I started with 1 ounce of the Kaido Shochu. This is a split-based drink with gin. I'm using Hendrick's just because it has that strong cucumber flavor as well. So 1 ounce each of both. And then I did a charred green onion blanc vermouth infusion. I left this in here so you guys could see. That's gonna be 3/4 ounce of that. And 1 dash of a mommy salt tincture. I used red boat salt. And then we're gonna give that a stir. We typically serve this as a set for 2. So we adapted these sake decanters as well as kaine sake cups as well. Usually we'd be filling up this little green section with crushed ice, just like martini preparations are sometimes served in a sidecar. Instead of a traditional garnish, I prepared a bowl of the tsunemono cucumber salad, which is usually just sliced cucumbers with rice vinegar, sesame oil, sugar, and soy sauce, and topped with sesame seeds. Sometimes I'll add a little bit of togarashi. So that would just be poured out like this. And then you would have a cute little cucumber to enjoy with it. And then for our second cocktail, being Japanese American, I didn't necessarily grow up with some of the more traditional stuff some of our other presenters had, but one of the first ways I really connected to my culture was honestly watching Sailor Moon, which sounds a little silly, but it's the truth. So this cocktail is called What Would Usagi-chan Drink? And for those who are big fans of the show, you'll probably know that the original name of Sailor Moon is not Serena, but Usagi. I did 1.5 ounces of a strawberry infused sochu. I used the Reishi ginger, which has a lot of fruit to it and a little bit of spice. The ginger and strawberry pair particularly well. 3/4 ounce of lemon juice. And then 3/4 ounce of a Calpico syrup. For those who haven't had Calpico, I'm sorry, this is my cat Yojimbo. He always likes to show up when I'm making cocktails. Calpico is a very popular Japanese soft drink. Sorry, buddy, you gotta get down. I'm gonna be straining this into a flute. and then topping it off with sparkling rosé. So essentially just a riff on a French 75. And then as a garnish to recreate Sailor Moon's kind of classic look, I took a lemon peel and we're going to twist it. Usually I have a very small piece of mochi to go along with it as well, but I couldn't source that today. A little twist, and it looks just like Sailor Moon's hair. Cheers.
That's great. I love that drink. It's so interesting where people get inspirations to make a drink. And, you know, thinking about that Sailor Moon, and for the audience that's watching, if you don't know, a common folklore in Asia, but also specific to Japan, is this idea that there are rabbits on the moon and they're pounding mochi. So, you know, that's for those in the know, that's a very cool tie-in in that garnish, besides the visual look of the hair.
Yeah.
So some questions for you as well on the how you made this drink. So the Calpico, you said it's a syrup. So do you take the Calpico and add more sugar to it, or how do you do that?
Yeah, it was just a 1-to-1 syrup today. I've done this as a more complex batch before, where I acid adjusted the Calpico and also added pink glitter to it, but I felt like that might be overkill. But Calpico itself is a little milky and quite tart. So adding equal parts sugar makes a pretty rich but balanced syrup, because the sweetness of Calpico and the tartness of Calpico already kind of balance themselves out.
And then, you know, I've never really worked with Calpico myself. I recognize that milky color to it. When you shake with it, does it also affect the texture, you know, like a milky drink?
It will be a little richer. There isn't any of the milk fat in it, I believe, or at least I have to go through the ingredients to double check. But there is definitely a little bit more foam to it than your standard drink. So I would say there's definitely a richness, but I wouldn't classify it as a creamy drink in any way.
Got it. And when you put that on the menu, I don't know how things are in Texas, but in New York, at least, people are very worried about the labeling of like all the allergens and things,
yes.
Whether it's on the menu. Certainly we need to train our staff to know it. With Calpico, do you tell people that milk is an ingredient in this, that it's dairy?
I haven't. It's only been on the menu at twice so far at our pop-ups, and we haven't had an issue, but that is a very good point to make.
It's a thing that's very specifically of concern in New York, and it's not a thing that I found in very many other places, but quite literally, we have to post in the kitchen every allergen that is used in-house, like by health department law, and we will lose points if we don't do it. So,
wow.
Yeah, it is a thing here. But a question that you know, maybe Haru can answer. Before, I saw he was wearing rubber gloves. Specifically, there was a problem with the health department in New York about bartenders, whether or not you had to wear rubber gloves. And specifically also people working in sushi restaurants, sushi chefs also had to wear rubber gloves. So I don't know, Haru, did you have to wear gloves when you're working at Masa?
Yes, absolutely. It's more of a safety precaution, just cleanliness. I know bartenders who, before, you know, the whole pandemic, were already wearing gloves, but yeah, with the new CDC guidelines, it just became, you know, more necessary, and I kind of got used to it. you honestly get a better grip on things at wearing gloves while you're bartending. So
yeah, I know that in New York, there was a specific provision that said that sushi chefs and bartenders didn't have to wear gloves because they were washing their hands often enough.
Well, so handling of raw foods requires you, if it's meant to be eaten in that state, you're required by law to wear gloves. Otherwise, you take a hit on your food safety grade. So you basically get a grade of A, B, C, and then you can also fail and have to essentially retake these food safeties in New York. And so this was a big problem with a lot of like traditional sushi restaurants where, like, you know, you're not wearing gloves. It's like, well, we're not supposed to. So it was
here,
very
going back to your first drink. You
yes.
Working with vinegar and with pickles as a garnish. So traditionally, pickles are very common in bars. You know, pickled eggs is a thing you find in the American dive bars. What do you find? You know, how does working with Asian pickles? You said you're working with like Korean pickles as the concept, and then now working with the Japanese cucumber pickles. How does working with vinegar and pickles and cocktails, you know, work for you, and how do you think about that?
Honestly, the most complicated part of it has been that we often use daikon, and pickling daikon is actually very aromatic and not the most pleasant of smells. So we always were rinsing our pickles a good hour before open for when we had to do a presentation or when we had this cocktail on the menu originally. Tsunamono is very, very simple and very much barely a pickle. It has a little bit of vinegar in it, but I'm really more preparing the sauce and then pouring that over the cut cucumbers rather than letting it sit and pickle for a long period of time.
Got it. And using rice vinegar versus, a red wine, white wine, champagne vinegar, do you find that it's very different?
I haven't made this particular dish with anything but rice vinegar and white vinegar because honestly, I've had rice vinegar in my fridge for my entire life. But I would say, yeah, it would be very different. For those who've worked with shrubs and pickling before, you get a very different outcome with the type of vinegar that you use. With doing Daijoubu cocktails, which are trying to be so true to the Asian heritage, I find it particularly important to be as close to the original cooking recipes that we follow. So this is very much just adapting an existing recipe rather than coming up with something completely different.
Got it. And for those who haven't perhaps seen some of the drinks that you've been doing in your pop-ups, I know you had a lot of really interesting and cool presentations. So different, non-standard glassware. So can you walk us through some of the cool ideas that you've had and you've implemented, and maybe give us some things about maybe ideas you've tried to do that didn't work, that worked, or maybe you're holding as a thing for the future?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Daijoubu pop-up, like I said before, our whole concept is super Asian cocktails, but it's, I think, a almost overwhelmingly immersive experience when you get to go to one of our in-person pop-ups. There's usually some sort of video screen playing Asian media. All of the music is in an Asian language or by Asian American artists. Every time we completely redecorate, including not only just like putting stuff up on the walls, but lights and hanging. So it's for everything in the bar, it has to really scream Asian culture in some way or another. So the glassware has to very much be part of that because you can't have a super Asian cocktail in a very normal glass. Honestly, the hardest thing has been sourcing. We've gotten a lot of vintage glassware and a lot of one-time only finds. We'll go to Kmart or not Kmart, H Mart or any of the other Asian shops and just see what they have around. The biggest difficulty, other than keeping things in stock because glassware breaks very easily, is just being able to find more stuff. A lot of things have been custom made because we couldn't really find exactly what we're looking for. And particularly this past year when we were doing primarily to-go events, it was mostly me and my husband who both went to art school designing stickers or labels to put on bottles. And we got a boba sealing machine so that we could, present cocktail in a boba format, but also they had either Totoro or another cartoon character that we all grew up in love on them as well.
And I think I saw you were doing a drink where you're serving it like in a like a shoyu, like a dispenser, like a soy sauce dispenser. What was that drink?
That is the hype ball, which was basically just a chuhai riff. It was vodka, which is infused with plums and white peaches, ichiko shochu, and then I made a sakura cordial, I guess. It was very difficult to replicate the flavors of cherry blossom with what you can find in the United States, but a combination of one pretty decent cherry blossom extract, a bunch of different flower waters, different fruit infusions, and a little bit of choyo was able to create a fairly realistic cherry blossom flavor, that with soda water. But we originally just took old Kikkoman bottles and refilled those. And recently we redesigned our own kind of riff on the Kikkoman label with our own name and information on it. And that was used for one of our bottled cocktails.
Great. Have so many more questions to ask you when we get to our discussion phase about your pop-up. But next, we have Masa. What's the drink you've got to show us, Masa?
Hi, Don. How are you? Hi, everyone. Hello. So today I'm making like a hot cocktail. So I guess the inspiration was oyuwari. So can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, great. So oyuwari is type of the shochu service in Japan. So mizuwari, which is diluted, added water to it. So and with the ice, and you drink over the ice on the rocks. Also, oyuwari is equally popular. So basically, you add hot water, I guess, sometimes tea. It's great for winter time or like when the weather is cold. But I think even in the summertime, some shochu enthusiasts, I guess some people chose to drink oyuwari, the shochu and hot water, even in the summertime or regardless of the outside temperature. And oyuwari, and then again, I'm from Japan, and I remember like I saw someone that like oyuwari, like the purpose of oyuwari, and I was told the first time was like to get drunk faster. So like kind of like a result that like you want to get into. But to me, I guess oyuwari is just like similar to hot sake. It's just kind of opens up different spectrum of aroma and the taste from shochu, what the base shochu is. So today I'm kind of making the oyuwari, but also kind of meets that classic American cocktail bull shot. So beef bouillon, the beef broth with vodka. So that was what I read was from David Wondrich. It was like kind of like around popular in the 50s, and kind of credit goes to one of those bars in Detroit and area. So kind of like that meets both. And then also I personally like cooking, and then wintertime I make this bone broth. So basically roasted bone marrow. I use lots of chopped daikon radish, touch a bit of garlic, and then ginger. So just I cook that for about 2 hours and strain it, and later put in the fridge and skim off the fat, and then here comes like beautiful bone broth. So sorry for the long intro, but here I'm going to make this drink. Here, I'm gonna make in this mug. First, I'm going to add half bar spoon of salt in, also touch a bit of sugar as well. So just regular white sugar. It's a quarter bar spoon of sugar in, and just touch a bit of yuzu kosho, which is the kind of the salted, I guess the Japanese green pepper with the yuzu skins in it. So I'm gonna add a touch of a bit of that as well. Sounds already delicious. And then I'm going to add, today I'm going to use this shochu called Mugon. From this Mugon is from Kumamoto. This is 100% rice shochu, and it's aged. So it's aged, but like more, to me, the when I taste this itself, I get more kind of impression of like reposado, like more like rested. So it's not much about adding like a whiskey. It's not much about adding wood or barrel quality to it. It's more about kind of let it rest in the barrel. Like, yes, it's aging, but kind of like brings out lots of sweetness from the rice, as well as tones down koji flavor in a very nice way. So sometimes, my confession is like I haven't started drinking or appreciating shochu till very recent, and because of the association when you're younger, something you can get hands on. It was a shochu to me, and so kind of like I get I'm going to stop right there. The detail of how I was used to getting a little intoxicated when I was very, very young. So anyway, so I'm going to add a move on about 1 ounce. Okay. So now, kind of stir that all together. So what's inside of the cup is sugar, salt, yuzu kosho, and shochu. And now I'm going to add my bone broth, really nice and hot. It's almost like 1:5 ratio. So inside of this cup is 1 part of shochu and 5 parts of bone broth. My bone broth, I don't add salt or any seasoning in it when I'm making it. Just really pure bone, daikon radish, the ginger, and touch a bit of garlic. So really nice and hot. So this drink I like to call is improved bone broth. So kind of improved bone broth, improved pasta. I'm going to add literally 1 drop of pastis. There you go. So what it does is it kind of adds a very floral kind of sweetness that goes well with this beautiful rice shochu. And that's it. And a little tiny bit about the piece of yuzu peel. So almost like a soup, but boozy. And I guess like that's kind of a credit goes back to bullshot as well. And Japanese shochu served oyuari style. So I can just drop that piece in there. It's absolutely beautiful. And cheers.
That's amazing, Masa. It
delicious.
Sounds more like you are making a soup than making a cocktail. And seems perfect for today's weather in New York, where it's both snowing and raining and all sorts of nastiness outside. So I have to ask, what's the mug? Dinos?
Oh yes, Dino's. Dino's is it's one of the best bars in America, located in Nashville, and they serve one of the best burgers. And to me, it's almost like museum level burgers. And absolutely delicious.
Got it. And what's the animal on it? Is it a cat, an armadillo? I can't really tell.
Yes, armadillo, I believe.
Armadillo.
Yeah.
Got it. So there's all these words that are, kind of becoming part of the lexicon for bartenders that are coming from Japan. So, obviously you're talking about oyuwari for this drink. You mentioned mizuwari as well, which is just more at room temperature or slightly chilled, as opposed to oyuwari, which is hot. And then, chuhai was mentioned earlier by Caer. So for the people, who have not really experienced this in a traditional sense, what to you is the proper, basic ratio for an oyuwari for a mizuwari?
Oyuwari, mizuwari. So speaking of different types of shochu, so naturally, the honkaku shochu comes in like 25%, and there's also the higher proof that the 40%, which people are more easier to make in the cocktails as well. But I think to me that the honkaku shochu, that those 25% alcohol is it's great cocktail ingredients as well. Speaking of ratio, I think this cup is a little bit bigger than I'm just assuming if I was in Japan making oyuwari, you might use a teacup that you have in the house, or even restaurant that people use it teacup just for serving tea as well. So Japanese teacup much more smaller than this general coffee mug cup. So I'll say about 6 to 8 ounces cup. I think that's a volume of the cup, and I think it's just a preference of the person, and if I serve one person and say want to make 1:5 ratio oyuwari, and then they might come back to me yo, it's too weak, and it's just animal based, might happen. But again, it's very interesting that kind of the hot drink that the aroma, and then put your nose in, just like a wine glass, that kind of spectrum of the wear. The aroma kind of brought out by heat and also dilution, and that kind of vapor, and then the oil kind of hits your nose. So I think it's kind of interesting to play that as well, that you can make one oyuwari with maybe 1:5 ratio. Like I think that's a little too subtle, but like I would say like 2:5, something like that. And it also interesting that if you try like 1:1 ratio as well, and then it's absolutely beautiful that like 25% alcohol. So still you can do 1:1, but it's not still too kind of in your face boozy, in terms of the alcohol intake. Mizuwari, I guess the same, just like how much like pack the ice in the drink and how fast you're gonna drink. But I think you can just try that, like I'll say 1:1.5 to 5, like 2:5. I think something like that. That ratio might be great to start, and you can still taste the shochu as well. I guess it's different from you drinking at home and drinking at the restaurant and bars. Yes.
So when you said the ratio for the mizuwari, you're saying it's almost the exact same ratio as the oyuwari for you.
I might do a little more, like I think I might put more alcohol in it because the ice is gonna melt, and while you're drinking, it depends on how fast you're gonna drink. Again, oyuwari kind of stays the same. Again, like the temperature goes, the temperature of the drink goes lower, and then I guess like naturally you might taste a little bit less alcoholic. But yes, that's a good point. I guess like I might make mizuwari a little bit more alcohol in it than oyuwari.
Got it. And then for people who, most bartenders have definitely had a highball. Would you say that a chuhai and a highball is basically the same ratio in terms of alcohol and soda thing, or is it different? So chuhai comes with additional flavor that when you're speaking at the whiskey highball in Japan. So just like you can buy from vending machine as well, that comes in a can that's nice and cold and highly carbonated, and most of them are just purely just whiskey and soda. But the chuhai comes in like a bunch of different variations, which are like ume, all these kind of citrus, popular in Japan. So I think also touch a bit of additional sugar as well. Those are chuhais, and either buy from the vending machine. Yes, still refreshing. No ice. Open. It's cold enough, and you can just chug the whole thing, and it's still delicious. And then you go to the izakaya and order chuhai. I guess depends on how popular that is, but many places I believe still serve from the machine, like a guns like that we have in the US, which is pre-mixture of one of those syrupy the modifiers that are already in there that come there. Also the pump through the bottle, which is also put the carbonated water, shochu, and the syrup comes all together out of the gun. I believe is it about the same strength as like rum and coke? Is it weaker? Is it about the same?
Much weaker. I believe much weaker. And I guess also I personally like stronger drink, but like when you go to izakaya and the people order chuhais, because people want something a little bit lighter. So let me think, like back in the days that I guess like working in one of those like karaoke bars and like making a chuhai like out of the car. I never pay attention to much of like how much booze in it. But I believe chuhai generally a little bit more lower, and then highball, because you have like those a little bit more modifiers in it. But the highball that you kind of want like a little bit more whiskey in it, of course, like not too much, otherwise it gets too boozy. But if it's too low, you might find like it's kind of weak, another 3 fingers of whiskey in it. So I think whiskey highball in general, because of the whiskey is a start of course the shochu as well, but the chuhai is kind of more, if you want to enjoy chuhai just purely itself, like shochu and soda, I think you might want to add a little more shochu, but as a kind of mixed drink that's very popular in Japan, as a chuhai that people are familiar with. You go to izakaya, and then those kind of flavored can chuhai, I think the alcohol is a little bit lower than whiskey highball.
Great, thank you so much, Masa.
Of course.
And bringing up the rear, wrapping up our cocktail making session, Julia, I believe you have a couple of cocktails for us as well.
Thank you, Don. And I'm happy to just show one if that's better for timing.
Yeah, let's see them both.
See them both? Okay, great. Thank you. So firstly, Haru and Caer and Masa-san, all of your drinks sounded so good. And I was getting some nostalgia for each of them. So that was really beautiful. Thank you. I will start off by making another classic Japanese serve. This one is called chawari. And as Masa-san said earlier, oyuwari, oyu is hot water in Japanese, and then waru is to divide or to cut in this case. And in the case of chawari, cha is tea, and we're just simply cutting some shochu with that tea. So starting off with a glass of ice, gonna give it just a little stir, kind of start that chilling process. When you go to izakaya in Japan, there will often be chawari on the menu, and there will be typically two different ones. One is oolong chawari, so cutting with oolong tea, and the other is ryok chawari, when you're cutting with a green tea. So for the chawari I'm doing today, I'm going to work with a really beautiful green tea from Kyoto. And the shochu of choice is from Takahashi Shuzo, Takahashi Distillery. This is the Hakutake Ginde. And some of you may recognize this bottle. There's a trio of bottles of similar design. This particular one, Ginde, is their silver label, you could say. And this is a very gorgeous Kumamoto Jocho, Kuma Jochu. So it actually has a designation of origin, protected by the government. It's coming from a very specific region, Hitoyoshi in Kumamoto. They're using local rice, local water, and the producer's doing some really lovely things with rice shochu, showing this broad range of styles and profiles that you can get from just one ingredient. What they're doing to set this shochu apart from the rest is they're doing a low temperature fermentation with ginjo sake yeast. And what that brings is the most incredible bright aroma, almost like tropical fruits are just jumping from the glass right now. Even just sitting right here, I can smell it coming out from the glass, which is so stunning and beautiful. To accent that, in Japan, it'd be classic and typical to just now pour some tea over the top, but I did want to accent it with another gorgeous product coming from the same area. This is from a different distillery though, and this is a bermutto. Rather new to the US market and a new product in general, but inspired by vermouth, one may say, but there is no grape involved in here at all, no fruit, it is rice. So nihonshu, Japanese sake as the base, fortified with shochu, and then infused with some key Japanese ingredients like yomogi, which is mugwort, there's kabosu, yuzu, and sansho. So coming through with some really gorgeous kind of spice and herbaceous aromas to accent the more tropical notes that are in the Hakutake Ginde. And then from there, I'll pour my tea. So just a very simple serve. I will usually just free pour my shochu drinks at home and at the bar too. But in general, I'm pouring about 2 ounces or so of the shochu, half an ounce of the bermutto, and then filling 3 to 4 ounces of ryokucha, the mixer. And when I'm drinking at home, I'll usually just have a little carafe of the tea on the side and keep my bottles on hand and just kind of top off over that same ice as I go. So just a very simple, easy serve, but I really love how it highlights the delicate notes of the shochu. The really beautiful thing about some Japanese teas and this sencha that I'm using specifically is that when brewed at a little bit of a lower temperature, so around 170, 175 degrees for a minute and a half, you get these extraordinary tropical fruit notes. And with this particular one, I get some passion fruit. So again, that's a reason why I wanted to bring sencha into the mix for this simple chawari. So simple yet complex all at the same time. And for the next drink, Masa-san and I must have been connected a little bit because I wanted to do an oyuwari as well. It could be the weather we've been having in Chicago too. It's been very, very snowy. So I hope everyone's cozy wherever they are. When I make an oyuwari, the way that I was taught is to pour the hot water first. And this is said to help warm the vessel that everything is going to be poured into, but also having that hot liquid on the bottom means that when you pour the lighter density alcohol over the top, it kind of just melds together really beautifully. Those aromatics just leap from the glass and you almost don't have to stir it at all. So oyuwari, I often like to drink it as go-go, which means 5 to 5, so 1 to 1 in English. Some other popular stirs might be rokuyong, so 6 parts shochu to 4 parts water. Depending on the ABV of the shochu, I will adjust those ratios. So as Masa-san said earlier, typically we'll see shochu around 25, 24% ABV, though there are some when you get into the barrel aged shochu realm where you start to see them at 40%, 43, and as high as legal limit of 45% ABV. The shochu of choice for my oyubari today is the Tenshi no Yuaku from Nishishuzo. So we're going down to Kagoshima for a moment. Kagoshima is towards the southwestern part of Kyushu, and that is where sweet potatoes first started to come into Japan. The old name for the region is actually Satsuma, and the name of imo, or potato in Japanese, satsumaimo, specifically refers to sweet potatoes. This is a satsumaimo shochu. I believe it's 83% sweet potato in the base with 17% rice, which is the koji portion of the shochu. So for this, I have my hot water in the cup. I'm just going to pour an ounce, maybe an ounce and a quarter with a little bit of love of the Tenshi no Yuaku. And a really fun note on this shochu before I carry on is this absolutely stunning label. Tenshi are angels, means angels in Japanese. Yuaku means temptation. So this is the angel's temptation. In other words, angels share. So hearkening to one of the techniques that they use when resting this is that they're aging it in ex-sherry barrels. Not exactly sure which ones they're using. Could be Amontillado, could be Oloroso. And the age range kind of has varied over the years, but I've seen some citing 10 years, some citing 12 years, but that's not necessarily the entire time rested in wood, rather just rested in general, some of that time in sherry barrels, which gives this incredible kind of nutty note next to the richer, rounder, brown sugar, sweet notes of this sweet potato. To accent the sweet potato and then bring a little something extra to the cocktail is benimosu. This is a purple sweet potato vinegar coming from Kyoto. The family who makes this is actually in an area very close to where I grew up. So it's kind of exciting to use this. And a little bit goes a very, very long way. Benimosu, just a tiny splash. And then for a little bit of sweetness, umeshu. Ume is a Japanese stone fruit, often called a plum, but technically closer to an apricot if you speak to someone in the botany world. And this is going to bring a hint of brightness, almost like like a sour cherry profile. This particular one is coming from Hiroshima, the Kamoizumi, and they are using a genshu sake, so undiluted sake, in making this, and also fortifying it, of course, with some brewer's alcohol. But this comes through just a hint of roundness to again highlight the sweeter notes that are found in the aged sweet potato shochu, the Tenshi no Yuaku. And this one I called Angels Ate Imo, meaning angels ate sweet potatoes from their share from the barrels. So cheers, thank you so much.
I was on mute that time. Thank you so much, Julia. Such a great description of all the products you use. I have less questions for you on the specific things used, but perhaps you can help describe to the audience. You mentioned in the fortified modifier that you use that it has sansho in it, which is something that Masa also mentioned. And so my limited understanding is that it's similar to like a green Szechuan peppercorn. Can you describe what it is and kind of like where else you would find that in Japanese cooking, and what other uses you've seen it in?
Absolutely. Sansho is such a cool ingredient. So the tree itself is in the citrus family, but it grows these tiny little fruits that we can call peppercorns or pepper berries. They're used in a similar fashion, but technically they're the flowers and the fruits. In the springtime, we get kinome, which is the leaf of the sansho plant, which is these stunning little they almost look like it's like a single strand of stem with small little circles coming off of them, and we'll serve it over rice. And the aroma that comes off of them is akin to, freshly zested lemon or lime, yuzu. There's a little bit of a white pepper, green pepper kick to it. It's acidic in nature, but at the same time has this zinging, almost numbing quality and sensation, very much like the Szechuan peppercorns. So they are related. In fact, the ones in Japan, though, I've noticed tend to be a little bit more citrusy and bright, whereas a lot of the Chinese ones used in Szechuan cooking, I find to be a little bit more on the floral side of the spectrum. So really interesting to see those differences and nuances. In the springtime, you'll find these a lot in Japanese restaurants, just the fresh berries, even as a garnish that you can have a couple on the side. In drinks, I think we're seeing it more and more in gin these days, with Japanese gin making on the rise. Sansho is used kind of like green cardamom has been used, I feel, in some of the Western gins. It brings this brightness, this pop, this zestiness, which is really incredible. So if anyone wants to experience sansho, it's very hard to find fresh sansho. In Japan, you can get like fresh pickled sansho in jars, which is really delicious. But you can find dried sansho in stores. But if you want to experience through the liquor side of things, Nikka gin is one of the most sansho expressive bottlings out there. So the Japanese berumoto as well, you can definitely, yes, get it on the nose. It's very much there. So yeah.
Great. And then, so when people are working with tea in cocktails, a lot of times, if you look at like Dave Wondrich's notes in his like book on punch, he'll say make a strong tea, to get a little bit more tea flavor, because it'll, you're competing against the alcohol. When you're working with tea, do you find that you need to make it stronger? Do you make it the same strength as if you were going to have the tea on its own? And you were saying how you were doing a hot steep. Do you ever do a cold steep? Let us, clue us in on how you work with tea in cocktails.
Absolutely. So with tea and with Japanese tea, green teas, even oolong cha, those less processed teas especially, you want to start off if you're brewing hot with a lower temperature to bring out some more of those richer umami-like characteristics that are in the leaves. And in doing so, you can also get multiple steeps out of them. And with each steep, you'll pull out different flavor profiles. And so with that, you have the opportunity to blend and create these layers all from one tea with multiple steeps. When it comes to mixing, I feel as though in America, possibly the interpretation of a strong brew means extra hot water, extra long steep. But in working with tea, I do suggest pulling back on the steep time and also being very mindful of the temperature depending on the type of tea that you're working with, because you can bring out some intense astringency and tannin from the tea that isn't necessarily pleasant. So rather than doing that, I do recommend concentrates in the form of working with maybe even double of the amount of tea leaves as you typically would to make that brew, but then follow the exact same brewing processes other than that. For that, with chawari, that is a nice, thoughtful thing to do because it is served on water. But part of the beauty of this drink is that it's not meant to be overthought. It is more so that drink that you are sitting in a smoky, just bustling, very hot izakaya, eating karaage and all kinds of yakitori and hiyayakko, and like the table is just like filled with amazing food, and you're thirsty and you're just drinking a super, super refreshing chawari. So in the bar side, we can get super, super geeky with it and very precise and very methodical and thoughtful about every single facet of the tea, the steep, the temperature, the ratios and everything. But at the end of the day, I feel as though the enjoyment level of that drink is going to be the same no matter what we do.
And then you mentioned the ratios, like saying like a number and how you were referring to the oyuwaris. Is that a standard thing? So if you were in Japan, would a customer ask for a ratio in the way that like someone in the States would ask for like a 50-50 martini or a 2-to-1, ratio?
Yes. Exactly.
And it generally, it's that, you know, it seemed like a 3, 4, 5 kind of were the common numbers that seem to be thrown around a lot. Do people go wildly, you know, weird at all, or is it pretty much everyone's kind of in that same middle ballpark?
It's kind of like, you know, how wet someone wants their martini in a way. The typical or more traditional might be like 50-50. So we call it gogo, just 5-5. The other would be rokuyon, so 6-4. And sometimes you'll see yonroku. That's where it's getting to be a much softer serve. There's some stories from my like friends who would make it for, you know, a family member, and then over the years, the amount of shochu would get lower and lower, just be more water, more water, more water. So it's a very personal thing, yeah, which is fun. But it's nice because you can go back to those standard serves. Though something to keep in mind is that typically they are with shochu that are bottled around 25% ABV and not 40% ABV, for example. And so that will definitely change those ratios.
And the two numbers, is it like when you're ordering a martini where the first number is the stronger as the alcohol? So
yeah.
Got it. And then the last question I have for you was the vinegar you used. Do you know if that vinegar also uses koji? Because I know that some vinegars in Japan also include koji in the production process.
I was looking into the production of this, and it didn't say it specifically on the ingredients label. It just says imo and kome. So they don't label koji specifically, but in some cases on this label, for example, on the front, I mean, it does say it in English, but sweet potato and rice, that rice is the koji portion, and they don't say koji specifically. So I would imagine, I wouldn't be surprised if they were, but nothing indicates that they are right now.
Got it. Thank you so much. So as I said, you know, people who are using the chat, please continue to use the chat. If you have questions, please throw them into the chat, and we're going to move into more of a discussion. So the topic today is appropriation versus appreciation. And to kind of give just a background, besides the general kind of the zeitgeist at the moment of people, you know, what's in the air and what people are talking about in the cocktail community, it was partly driven by the fact that I'm personally kind of tired of seeing, you know, lychee martinis as the default Asian cocktail you'll see in a place. For these seminars that we've been doing, we've had a lot of people with Asian ancestry or people who have visited Japan, really drawing on specific personal experiences making those drinks. And for most people who are watching this, you probably, you know, haven't been to Japan, and you probably aren't of an Asian descent. So wanted to just kind of talk about tips on like how not to mess up, how to be respectful. And I'm assuming most of the people watching this, you aren't going to make the obvious mistakes. So no one here is going to start a statement by saying, I'm not racist, but the question is, what are the nuances in how do you navigate these things? As an Asian American, it seems to me very easy as a, like, I just cringe when I hear or you know, of something. And it's not something I was ever taught. It's just something I kind of grew up with. And I imagine it must be like learning English as a second language, where the grammar is so weird. How do you like wrap your head around this? But as a native English speaker, when I hear a turn of phrase, it either just sounds right or doesn't. So to someone who didn't grow up with that, how do you learn that? How do you learn, you know, what is crossing that line of being, you know, that is or is not respectful? Because as you are working with shochu, certainly it's a product from Japan. And as Haru said, you know, things that grow together, go together, like you're going to want to work with Asian ingredients, but they're, you know, and by all means you should, but you don't need to only work with Asian ingredients, obviously. And, you know, how not to pick the obvious, like just terrible, you know, racist name for a drink. Obviously, you're not going to do that. So what are the other things you should be thinking about? And we have such an interesting group of people here together. So I'm just going to start by asking everyone a question, and then we will, you know, kind of take questions from the audience and also have just a general discussion. So I'm going to start with you first, Masa, because this is something that you do at your bar in terms of working with bartenders who, you know, not all your bartenders are Japanese, and they're working in a Japanese bar, your menu definitely has a Japanese theme, you know, in all your drinks. So what's the advice you give your bartenders when they're making a new drink? You know, how do you kind of push them in the right direction, push them away from the wrong direction, and say, here's the way to do it right for your bar, for Katana Kitten?
Hi, Don. Hi.
I can hear you.
Okay, great. So answer to the question. So Katana Kitten, where I work, is the Japanese American cocktail bar. So we have cocktails and food that everything is basically based on the story of the food or flavor, kind of like Japanese rituals. That's something you can find, like a drinking, eating culture in the izakaya. And we kind of like marry that to basically American bar setting, the specific, really casual American dive bar setting. So speaking of which, like style of the approach to what we make to put on the menu here at Katana Kitten is completely collaborative, like nothing really like a Japanese, but well, like definitely has touch of it because that's something unique strength that we have. And yes, of course, it at the moment I think I'm the only Japanese. Well, head bartender Abel, he was born in Ohio, but he grew up in Japan actually. So everyone's got kind of certain amount of the certain type or connection to Japan. They even like something. Some people say like, oh, I was always interested in Japanese movies. Like James, my business partners, and you know Greg Baum, who's the owner of Katana Kitten and Cocktail Kingdom. He's again, there's someone who's been to more bars, Japanese bars in Japan more than anyone else that who I remember. So answer to the question that to how I help people to build a drink to put on the menu, the Katana Kitten, just the conversation, I guess, like same to any other bars, and like, you know, helping help each other to come up with some kind of seasonal cocktails and stuff. We always start from the classics. So, all right, so what's the story behind this drink? This is, you know, either that cocktail could be martini, like the idea of Manhattan, and the idea of Paloma, idea of all these classic cocktails, and kind of, okay, so the identity is there, that the identity of Paloma and that like specific grapefruit, and then like, oh, interesting, and then, you know, like someone wants to take lead and like, you know, oh, I think the one in the past we made was who did I make with? I think it was a Lalo from, you know, originally from Mexico, but you know, like he's got this kind of like, you know, the ideas in like smoked salt and like using pomelo instead of grapefruit, and then where I introduce is like, you know, kind of work together. All right, let's give more kind of warmth and some like seasonality, like kind of more like fall to the winter. So just have a like hojicha, and then, you know, like not everyone needs to know about hojicha. I mean, it's lovely tea, Japanese roasted green tea. But so what we did was kind of like, okay, and then someone mentions like, how about jasmine tea? And so jasmine tea is cool. So what we kind of mimic what there was, that like kind of same procedure, like in a porcelain pan, like we toasted the jasmine tea in it, and it's kind of made a jasmine tea hojicha. Jasmine tea is not Japanese, but again, that kind of like as a whole, that culture of tea drinking in Asia that kind of comes together. And here in America, everyone's from everywhere. So I think we usually happen this way, that my advice to the staff is that like, okay, so what are you looking for? But like, it's kind of, sometimes they haven't had it before, but so, you know, in that case, I can cook for them like specific food to kind of let them experience actually what it is, and then taste, and then yeah, like that actually kind of makes sense, and it kind of reminds me of my childhood. My grandma used to make these back in Mexico, and to me, like Japanese and the Mexican, I guess I believe that kind of everyone has like kind of feel like it relates to something like traditional and authentic and nostalgic things. I think any cultural background, like you find like similarity in somewhere. So not completely foreign at the same time. So, and then again, everyone's taste palette, like, you know, like the professional bartender who works here, that everyone loves food. So naturally, their balance and the palette is already there. So what I can help is that kind of introduce, oh, you know, I can pick this up from Sunrise Mart, and then like you taste it, and then like let me know. So kind of thing. So, and by the time like the discovery of like, oh, yeah, now I know how to say in Japanese, but like I kind of knew it from before, you know, like it's because of the memory of the taste and flavor. I'm sure everyone, you know, interested in food and beverage, whoever works in a restaurant and bar. So they're already there. Just all I can do is kind of help identify what that was or where that comes from.
Yeah, great, thank you. I think it's really funny how oftentimes it's not so much those of us who are in the industry who have that expectation or that, you know, demand that it has to be a certain way. Often it comes from the guest. And so my next question is going to be to Haru. And funnily enough, kind of a weird example of this was, so I used to work at a bar called PDT, which at the time was really kind of thought of as this speakeasy. In my experience, in only one time did somebody get mad that we were making modern drinks. Most of the time, no one comes to us and, you know, is like, how dare you as a speakeasy not make classic drinks, right? But this couple also showed up in like period flapper wear. It was really weird. But, you know, Haru, you work at a Michelin 3-star, a New York Times 4-star, like the pinnacle of like Asian, like of Japanese food in New York City. The people who are coming to spend, you know, easily $400 on the meal before alcohol probably have an expectation more so than even the guests going to Katana Kitten that they're in for an Asian experience. And my guess is that your chef doesn't tell you you must make only Asian cocktails, yet the guest expectation is probably different. And so what is that like for you in creating these drinks, and how do you navigate those guest expectations?
Absolutely. So what's interesting is like no one comes in as a blank slate. You know, everyone has their own personal experiences. They have essentially like a perception of like what is to be expected. And I think especially it kind of makes it hard on us, or that's the fun part of it, is how do you exceed that expectation? And what I've essentially like taken from it as the core is there's two kind of mottos that I end up leaning towards. One is being shibui, or it's a Japanese term meaning elegance without being ostentatious. And the other one being mottainai, or no waste. And it's about using what it is appropriately. So I think it's, when it comes down to it, it's using quality ingredients that are from the season. I'll be told by chef to, you know, use mangoes. It's mango season. We're getting fresh mangoes, use it in a cocktail. And so I have to make a cocktail, not necessarily Japanese, but a good quality cocktail that uses quality ingredients and that works well with the cuisine itself and reflects the image of the restaurant.
So you've never felt pressured, you know, to make an Asian drink there?
No, absolutely not. I think in that term, it's kind of like once you put yourself in a specific way, you've kind of like closed off a lot of other options to yourself. Like it's very hard to like determine what a Asian or Japanese cocktail is. Like you can use Asian ingredients or Asian techniques, but that might not necessarily make it into, you know, an Asian cocktail per se. You can also make an Asian cocktail that doesn't use any ingredients or techniques, potentially.
Can you also tell us a little bit about the food there and how that also reflects? I know that one of the dishes that's probably most well known there is like an entire truffle that's been, I think it's like tempura fried. Like, so how does that manifest in the food?
So, well, at our restaurant, we don't really consider ourselves like traditional sushi. It's Masa sushi. It's his style, it's his interpretation of what is the best experience. And one of those sushi pieces is shredding truffle and serving it in a piece of sushi rice. And it is phenomenal because it is perfectly balanced with other ingredients on that rice itself. And obviously, it is one of the most contemporary pieces of sushi imaginable. In fact, it's probably more akin to Italian sushi, if you think about it.
Yeah, it's almost like a risotto ball in a way.
Exactly. It's shredded truffle with Reggiano Parmesan and a Himalayan pink salt with truffle sauce, house-made truffle sauce. So it is not, not Japanese inspired, but it was something that the chef came up with it on himself. And I think you can only really make what you know. If that's, from your experience or what you learn from the environment that you're around in. And I think that's the key aspect of what it is.
Yeah, so for many people, they aren't really exposed to things, so they have to kind of go out and find it for themselves. Bartender Masa is saying how, when his staff is interested in a thing, he'll stop by an Asian grocery store and then we'll bring an ingredient to the bar, be like, oh, that reminded me of this thing, you need to try this. Caer, you specifically you started the Daijoubu pop-up series to, bring that Asian representation. Did you bring that up specifically because you felt that, your market, Texas or your city needed it more? Or is it just kind of a general, the world needs it more? And then as somebody who's really going out there and saying that I am going to represent Asian American, I'm going to be this representation of this hyper Asian, as you said, when you were talking about the pop-up, are you worried about going too far? Like what are you worried about and how do you think about your pop-up?
Yeah, there are all those things. I would say that rather than us starting the pop-up because we felt like the world needed it, it was more that me and Sharon felt like we needed it. We are both American-born Asian people, and therefore haven't necessarily been able to connect completely to our Asian roots as much as we would like to. I didn't grow up speaking Japanese. I learned in high school, and Sharon often talks about how she grew up in a very Chinese area of San Francisco, but always felt the need to be more American or more white passing. And so at a certain point, you're kind of like, screw it. I really want to connect to my culture. It's a huge part of who I am, but I only have so many ways to do it. And at the time I was working at the Roosevelt Room with Sharon, and there were 4 Asian girls working there. And that was the first time I've ever worked with another Asian girl behind the bar. And just getting into someone would bring this food dish or that thing, and we got to talk about the variations of flavor within different styles of rice. And it felt like, okay, we all are talking about this, we're all speaking the same language in terms of flavors, let's just start to make cocktails with it. But obviously that doesn't necessarily fit in with most American cocktail bars. It's not like I can put a Sailor Moon drink on the menu at the Roosevelt Room and really have it fit the vibe. So we started doing the pop-up as an opportunity for self-expression. I definitely think that Texas could use, or didn't have as many great Japanese bars or Asian bars as some other cities do. So I think that it's definitely a good place to start what we're doing. And to what you were saying before, it is a little scary putting yourself out there as kind of a symbol of the Asian American identity, especially as someone who is half. You're like, am I Asian enough? And then you have to go through the whole process of course I am. This is part of who I am, and my expression is authentic to me. But to combat that, we also have been trying to incorporate other people into our pop-up as much as possible. And whenever we do travel, we have another Asian bartender pop up with us, and often of a different Asian descent. Because I am Japanese American and Sharon is Chinese American, most of the work that we do is very East Asian. And we are trying to expand that to the larger Pan-Asian experience as we grow.
Yeah, it's very difficult to, remind ourselves that Asia is not a monolith, and that, our experience is just a tiny fraction of, what it could mean to be Asian. So it's for every one of us, even if you are Asian, you have to always keep that in mind. And on that note, Julia, a question for you then. So you know, you worked in Japan, you know, in hospitality before, you know, coming to the States to then, you know, eventually opening your own bar. What is your experience of like being, you know, an Asian in Asia versus an Asian in America, and you know, and that idea of like, who am I? What is my self identity? Do you find that that there is like that uncertainty that Caer is like talking about? Do you feel that there is also this like almost sometimes I feel like for myself, I feel like I have to be performatively extra Asian in a room when I'm the only Asian because I have to represent. So what was that experience for you going from Japan to America?
That's a great question. I have always never felt enough one way or the other. Growing up, looking how I do in Japan, to being part Japanese in blood, feeling fully Japanese in my heart because that is my country and where I was born, but never looking it. So always having to prove myself, no matter who I interacted with, was a very real part of my childhood and young adult life. And then when I entered the service industry, there's a whole nother layer to being in service or in the hospitality industry in Japan. When it comes to language, there are many different ways in which you can phrase a sentence to either raise up another person, bring yourself down, or to be on an equal level, or vice versa. And when you are in the service industry, you're automatically at the lowest possible tier, and the guest or the customer is up here. And when you look different, there's another layer of an apology involved. I remember serving an older Japanese woman, and we were having a conversation, and she didn't really look at me at first. We were just talking about something on the menu. And then she looked up and looked at me, and she like stepped back. She was shocked. And she was like, "Oh, you don't look Japanese. Like, how are you speaking Japanese? Your Japanese is so good." And so I then went almost practiced deep apology for surprising her and shocking her and telling her, "I'm so sorry that you have to listen to my butchered Japanese. It's not as good as it should be." And it's like, that was how I worked, as like a walking apology, basically. So, but also wanting to be seen as Japanese more than anything else. So when I moved to America for university, I went through a different form of that because I don't immediately look Japanese. Some people see it, other people think I'm anything under the sun. Pretty much people have asked me, like, "Are you from such and such country?" If they didn't just assume that I was from America or whatever. And in the American side of things, actually, John, what you said about almost trying too hard or going overboard just to show your Asianness. When I was at school in the dining hall, I'd always eat with chopsticks, like everything. And that was just a thing I did. And part of that stemmed from when I was actually bar backing. And one of my first American jobs was a college bar, and I was working to prove myself to be a bartender. It was like a whole thing. But people would not believe me when I said I was from Japan. And being in the service industry in America, that conversation happens, right? People are like, "Oh, where'd you learn to bartend? Where are you from?" Like, that's the whole college experience. And whenever I would say Japan, more often than not, people would be like, "No," or "Prove it," or "You don't look it." And they would make me say stuff in Japanese. They would, they would ask all of these questions. And so honestly, it's been a very traumatizing experience just existing like this, because I genuinely feel Japanese more than anything else, but I don't look it. So I feel like I have to prove it, but then it's also very exhausting to constantly just be pushing it out there. And so I usually am just quiet at the end of the day. And I found a lot of solace, or almost I feel protected in bartending, and especially now owning a bar with a Japanese name, that people start to put the pieces together without me having to prove too much. But even to this day, I'll be bartending at Kumiko, my bar, and people think I am a server or the bar back or whatever that may be. And that's a whole nother, another thing about being a woman in this industry, right? But yeah, it's very interesting, I think, being mixed and doing this. And people like to see something and understand it. And if they don't understand it at first, it can be kind of intimidating or scary. And so they may pull away or push back or just not want to touch on that or whatever. So yeah, I don't know if that answered the question, but
No, thank you for sharing. It
yeah.
definitely answers the question. And, it's, we, every one of us, whether you're Asian or not, everyone has to, figure out who they are at some point in their life. And if you've never faced that, then you probably need to do that very quickly. And it's a thing that we don't really acknowledge to each other, no matter what you are, however you identify. And as you pointed out, intersectionality, the more things you are the intersection of, the more difficult it can be, and the heavier that burden can be. For those of us in the hospitality industry, just full stop, we are the ambassadors in many ways of so many things, whether it's ingredients, whether it's like introducing people to even the concept of why you would pay so much for a cocktail when they're used to paying so little for a mixed drink somewhere else. We are constantly having to explain things to people as part of our job. It can become exhausting, just from that, and then you layer all the identity stuff on top of that, and it is quite a bit. But at a certain point, those of us certainly here in this panel, we have all, volunteered, for better or worse, to be an ambassador in a way, whether it's for our own business, for ideas, to, take that educational role. But a question, for any one of us, who wants to, what do you think is the responsibility for somebody who isn't in necessarily a leadership role? So they aren't a bar owner, they're not, an expert on a panel, they're just existing in the world, but the world has expectations on them. And, often today the term people use is like a microaggression, right? How many times does somebody have to explain to somebody else some aspect of their culture, some word or something? At what point is it reasonable to be like, oh, that's a new word to me, please explain? At what point does that become a weird expectation and a burden? And whether you have a specific example that you've experienced, or if you have thoughts on that. This is in regards to a question that was brought up by, I think it was Linda, talking about how often an unfamiliar ingredient is like a high hurdle for people, whether they themselves might want to learn, or somebody coming to your bar might know nothing about that ingredient, in the same way that we are talking about ingredients. What are your thoughts on that?
I guess
Anybody?
I'll start. I would say I personally don't mind as much the explanation of an ingredient. Like, if you don't know what something is and I am making you a drink and you want to know what it's going to be like, absolutely ask that question. I don't consider that a burden at all. I would say the more problematic example is people asking you something because of the way you look, I guess, would be the only place to like be careful. Like, if you're in a cocktail bar and your bartender is explaining the ingredients, they should know what they are. But if you're just in a space, don't necessarily ask the only Asian person around you what shiso is. But beyond that, no, education is great. And the more that we teach you, the more that you'll know. And eventually the more you'll understand other cultures, and we don't even have to talk about that anymore.
I think the only caveat I would put to that is just to be very careful of the line between translation and localization, where translation is you're directly stating what one term is or what this definition is directly, whereas localization would be more of like turning it into a vernacular that's more understandable to a general audience. Classic example would be, rice wine or nigori sake being called unfiltered sake, but even though all sake has to be filtered, it's just a miscommunication, but it's meant to convey ideas in a simpler way, but it sometimes can be incorrect. Like how shochu is sometimes thought of as simply as Japanese vodka. That's another one. I think that's like the little thing to be very careful about.
What do you think in terms of then about somebody who is first starting to learn about this? So now you have you have the burden, as Caer, you said, as server, you should know what the ingredients in this drink is. But even when it's not something like shochu, which is new to many people in the States, even when it's something like gin or even American whiskey in America, there's so much misinformation, right? And obviously better bars have better training and better employees who can explain it better. But this is a common problem, right? There's so much misinformation in bars about the origin of this drink, what the percentage of a mash bill is. People tend to make up a lot of stuff. Where do you see that happening more so when it comes to things that are a little bit more exotic and out of the ordinary for an average American?
I would say yes, absolutely. It's easy to look at something unfamiliar and kind of distance yourself from it and say, oh, I don't really know what that is. It's something different from what I know. I think that's why a lot of localization tries to use terminology that's understood by those people directly. So it's hard because at that point, the ones that take it in and are kind of spreading misinformation or unwittingly spreading misinformation, they might be like focusing on the superficial aspects of the novelty of oh, here's a new Japanese thing, we're gonna add it to the bar, or here's a new spirit that came out, we're gonna work with it in a cocktail. So I think it's important to understand how you're integrating things into your program, if you will.
I had a very interesting experience once where a bartender where I was working used a type of furikake on a drink, and instead of finding out exactly what was in it or reading the label, pulled up Google and Googled furikake and read the Wikipedia explanation while I was in the room. And I immediately stopped it because it was like, this is the fastest way to spread misinformation I've ever seen. You have a staff of 25 people here in a cocktail bar who all are about to serve this drink for the next year at least because it's on the menu. And you're saying that there's fish and seaweed in this when it's really just dried shiso and that's been salted, which is a completely different thing. So just making sure that if you're deciding to use one of these ingredients that you're unfamiliar with, that's super okay. I love to see new things on menus and more representation, not only from Asian culture, but all cultures, but to take like one step of research further than you think you should, because it's so easy to make a mistake and there are so many people around you, and with the access to the internet that you'll probably be able to find out exactly what it is if you just are like, okay, I think I'm sure, I'm just gonna make sure I'm sure. But yes, that is probably the most prime example I can think of that particular moment.
Masa or Julia, any thoughts on a couple of these questions?
I think Haru's comment on translation versus localization is so key and important from both the bartender, the professional's perspective, as well as the guest or the consumer's perspective. For bartenders out there, really know what you're working with and understand it, and think about why you're using it. Why do you need to use it in this drink? Does it actually, is it just because it's yuzu and Japan is cool and yuzu is cool and you read that yuzu is going to be trending? Or is it because you inherently truly understand this citrus and how it's used through the different seasons in Japan? And do you know like what season this your yuzu was harvested in and why it's bringing these flavor profiles? And can you share all of that to your guest? And then from the guest side, the consumer side, when you're asking questions, don't look for the easy answer. Don't expect it either, because it's not on us to dumb down our culture for you. And vice versa. don't feel like you have to dumb down your culture for other people. We should not be diluting ourselves. I think that's something I've seen a lot through the years, and especially in moving to America from Japan and seeing how things are described here that I grew up with. I'm like, that's wrong, that's just wrong. And that's just misinformation, but it makes it more palatable to the consumer in the US. Rice wine being such a great example of that. Calling shochu Japanese vodka or Japanese whiskey, you know, not even thinking about koji. Why? Because it's a mold. Is mold scary in food? You know, thinking about all of these things, like why aren't we sharing the full truth of these ingredients? I think that's a really important thing. And the other is, why are we choosing to use these ingredients as well? And then looping it all back into, you know, having very thoughtful answers for that and looking to experts in these fields. There's so many incredible people out there who know the intricacies of Nihonshu brewing, of shochu distillation, of making umeshu, of growing the ume, of growing yuzu kosho, you know, all of these ingredients. And I feel like for a long time, we've been doing ourselves a disservice by just simplifying everything. So I hope to see more just transparency and open learning around it, and admitting when we aren't experts and saying, you know, I'm not an expert on this particular topic, but this is what I do know. And I learned it from so-and-so. You should check out their book, or you should check out their blog, or you should check out their Instagram, whatever it is. Like, let's guide people, guide our customers, our guests to the experts, and in turn learn to be experts ourselves, but don't try to be an expert if you're not, I think.
On that note of, you know, this translation versus, you know, just trying to make things easier for people, I think one of the easy pitfalls is just naming a drink, often the hardest part of making a drink. Very easy to make something delicious tasting, very hard to make a name that's catchy and that people are going to want to order, right? And so the most derivative, easy thing to do is to just say ingredient and something else people already know. So if I say yuzu margarita, it's easy, it's not offensive at least. The obvious don't do is try to make it exotic and call it the samurai margarita. That would be bad, right? But, you know, at what point, you know, like, is it, you know, where is that line of what is cringe, where is acceptable, what is just straight up offensive? Or if you can't really say the specific line, you know, what is the worst named Asian drink you've ever seen on a menu?
I guess the biggest thing is to stay away from stereotypes. Like, it's very easy to, you know, in America, for those who don't grow up around a lot of Japanese culture, you get most of it from samurai movies or anime or manga, and it's very easy to just pull on those first little things, you know. And some of those can be appropriate in the sense that, like, I'm not offended when people talk about like a character from a cartoon, and if it actually fits what's going on in the situation. But if you're only naming the drink something vaguely Asian because it has an Asian ingredient, like, that's silly and won't tell the guest anything about the drink, and therefore isn't really a good cocktail name, let alone it is kind of offensive. Yeah, just stay away from the stereotypes.
Seems obvious, but needs to be said.
I think to that point, one of my greatest weaknesses is naming cocktails. Anyone who works with me can tell you that I am the one who tends to go just very straightforward, hence like silver cellari. So when it comes to like naming the drinks, you know, don't call it something it is not. And I think something that we've established here in a way is that there is no one true way for there to be a Japanese cocktail. The idea of a Japanese cocktail, French cocktail, Mexican cocktail, American cocktail is, what is that exactly, right? A cocktail is a cocktail, diverse and distinct ingredients. So rather than applying a cultural name to something, I might suggest really leaning into, what was your inspiration? Was it a color palette? Was it a sunset? Was it a song? Does this make you think of a song? Avoiding saying Japanese anything, I think would be ideal, especially, and not even just in the cocktail name though, but in the description. It is a little bit frustrating when I see a cocktail, on a menu at just any cocktail bar at all that has one Japanese component in it. And in the description, it's like, this Japanese cocktail was inspired by XYZ. And you're like, this isn't a Japanese cocktail. That doesn't necessarily exist. There are cocktails created by bartenders in Japan, which have won competitions and are on the Japanese Bartenders Guild, essentially, the equivalent of that list of drinks that every Japanese bartender must know. Those could be called Japanese cocktails, I think, but anything that just has a random Japanese ingredient doesn't make it a Japanese cocktail, just like putting tequila in a cocktail doesn't make it a Mexican cocktail per se.
Yeah, I would definitely say if you are going to use a word, do your homework. You better really know what it is you're talking about. And that goes beyond just ingredients that you're using. If it's the first thing you think of because it's the only thing you know about that culture, you probably need to do more research about it. So if you say, I'm going to use the word haiku because that's the only form of Japanese poetry I've heard of, that would be like assuming that every English poem is a sonnet, because that comes from Shakespeare and he's from England. Obviously that is not the limit of all the poetry in the English language. In that same way, don't just pick a word and then decide you're going to use it because that's the only word you know. And so on that note of doing your research then, Caer, you said that the one of the biggest pitfalls you can have these days is Wikipedia, because people will go there first and foremost, they'll go to Google, they'll find the first thing that comes up in the search result, and then it may lead them to the wrong place. So for people who want to learn more about whether it's Japanese cocktails, food, shochu, whiskey, or Asian ingredients in general, what are your favorite books and resources, videos, other things? Where should people be going to find inspiration and to do their research? And so I'll give everyone a chance to think for a second, and then I'll have everyone give their short list of things to look for. For me, during this pandemic, one place that I've really been looking at is I've been trying to do a lot of Szechuan cooking at home because it's one of my favorite foods and I'm not going out to restaurants. So I've been cooking a lot of Szechuan food at home, and I've been cooking out of Fuchsia Dunlop's foods of Szechuan. And so for lists of ingredients from that region of China, I found it to be a great resource and a great place to start. It is not Chinese food. It is one tiny place within a very large country in a very large continent. And so don't try to find the one thing for everywhere. Try to find that super regional thing. In the same way, what is American food? Even what is barbecue is so regional specific, right? In that same way, find the most specific thing you can, and then find the books and things on that. And don't try to do everything would be my advice. So going in the same order that we started from the top, Haru, what are your favorite resources for folks?
Certainly. I actually like a lot of the academic textbooks. I actually am a certified sake sommelier from the SSI, and their textbooks on sake is very in-depth. I believe they also have one in shochu, but if you're looking for something specifically in shochu, I recommend Chris Pellegrini's Shochu handbook. It's almost, the Shochu 101 textbook, if you will. Like if you want to start, that's a phenomenal place to start. You put in the work, it's exactly what I like to look for.
And what was the acronym you said?
Oh, SSI.
Yes.
It's the Sake Service Institute. It's they about 4 years ago they started releasing textbooks in English. I believe they're also in Chinese as well. But it essentially breaks down the entire sake making process, and it's a great resource if you're interested in learning about sake. And then the Shochu handbook is also great for shochu specifically as well.
Great. Caer, what are your favorite resources?
With a lot of my more Japanese inspired cocktails, I tend to look towards culinary inspiration. And obviously there are a lot of dishes that I just grew up cooking because my mother cooked Japanese food. But there's a really good book called Japan the Cookbook by Manti Singleton Hachisu that is massive and breaks down many different styles of Japanese cooking and preparation. And through that, I've been able to find a lot of flavor combinations that are really common, or different ways to use native Japanese ingredients and how they pair well. So while it might not teach you anything about sake or sochu, if you're someone who's really interested in the native flavors of Japan and how to incorporate those, I think it's a really great resource and kind of my Japanese flavor Bible, because the flavor Bible doesn't have a lot of Asian ingredients.
Great. And Masa?
Hi, Don. Hi, everyone. So to me is the as a professional working in the restaurant and bar, and as a bartender, someone I really admire. He is the Grand Master bartender in Japan. His name is Yuzo Fukushima. He is over 93 years old bartender, Yuzo Fukushima, and I believe he published a couple of books, and one is like really the art form of his all handwritten classic cocktail recipes, and all in English as ingredients, and as well as welcome to my bar, that he by Yokoso. That's his book, and it's a copy of basically someone I look after. It's almost like how I want to come into work or continue to come to work as I age older, and someone makes me like really believe that, like, you know, this is what I want to do the rest of my life as I'm making drinks and, you know, working in the bar and restaurant, and, you know, like hopefully, you know, you guys people find me like turning 70 or 80 years old and still at the bar and kind of doing things. So in his book, I don't think it's in English translated version, but like in the Japanese copy, I can share the numbers and stuff with the JSS. It's really about attitudes towards work and like the details and nuances and emotions of, you know, what we do as a professional. And another thing, like, again, like I'm from Japan, and, you know, like kind of flavor that, you know, how I raised and kind of what I was eating as a Japanese and back in Japan, and came here, and like something great resource. And still today, I, you know, open once in a while, continuously, is the PDT cocktail book by Jim Meehan. And it's really just how, of course, Jim, but Don, yourself, and John, and Jeff, and everyone kind of approach to in each ingredient and amount they use and how they use and where they use it is really very inspirational to me. That kind of opens my eyes as, like, you know, as another like really level of awareness as an ingredients, and I didn't think about that. You know what I'm saying? That, you know, from just the, you know, there's so many cocktails in there, like from shisomo sour to, you know, like Sgt. Pepper, like Jeff's cocktails and Jim's cocktails, and, you know, your cocktail, Don's cocktails too. So kind of, to me, is that like really, that is like, to me, is a almost like a textbook to just open, you know, some like a recipe that like doesn't age, you know, and then yeah.
Great, thank you. And Julia, what are your favorite recommendations?
Masa-san, you didn't mention your own book, janai desu ka? So everyone listening, Urushido-san, Masa-san has written a book called The Japanese Art of the Cocktail, which is due to be out. Is it pre-order now? Yes, you can pre-order it now.
Yes, please.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Write it down.
So sweet.
The Japanese Art of the Cocktail. Please. I'm very excited to read this book. Just knowing Masa-san, I know that it's going to be brilliant and heartfelt, and everything that he was sharing about a book that he was recommending himself. So yes, Chris Pellegrini's book, The Shochu Handbook, is fantastic. Another really fun book written by a Japanese bartender, which has been translated into English, is by Ueda-san. Kazue Ueda wrote Cocktail Techniques. I believe that was translated back in 2010 or so. And his approach in writing is, I love it so much because he's like, this is what I do, period. You don't have to do it this way, but this is what I do. And it's very unapologetically him and just straightforward. And I love it. And he goes through various techniques and tools and everything. So it's a really lovely guide. A resource that I love, which is more Nihonshu, it's more Japanese sake focused, but the Society for Nara Sake Research has a website in both English and Japanese, and they have a massive, glorious sake glossary, which I adore because it goes deep into all of the techniques and processes of making Nihonshu, many of which are shared with sake production. So, or with sake, so with shochu production, my apologies. And so check it out, it's Nada, so NADA -ken, KEN.com /main/en/ or if you just go to the naraken.com website, there'll be like an English option to tap on, and then it'll take you to this amazing rabbit hole of a glossary. So that's one of my favorites. And I actually wrote a book too. Mine is coming out in fall 2021, so coming soon as well, and it's called the Way of the Cocktail. So I touch on Japanese bartending and such in it. Hi.
Thank you. And so this will be the conclusion of today's talk. Thank you all for sticking around for this. For those of you joining us after the fact, watching this video, if you have questions, please put them in the comments. Someone at JSS will probably get back to you. By all means, try reaching out to any one of us on social media. But also look at the JSS social media as well, and look at the people that JSS is following and that's following JSS. There are a lot of shochu producers who are on Instagram, who are on Facebook, and you can see them, posting photos of the process, posting photos of their just life in general, and will often respond to comments as well. So a great place is going directly to the source, and a lot of that is just available to you now on social media. So give that a quick look. And JSS has launched their website as well, which will have more and more information added to it, which is shochu.guide, and just on the web. So give that a look as well. And thank you to our guests today, our amazing and distinguished panel, to Haru, Caer, Masa, and Julia. And thank you for everyone who joined us for our talk.
Bye.